really is an honor and a pleasure to welcome Frederic Frommer for an author talk and signing of his recent book. I love the title, You Gotta Have Heart, A History of Washington Baseball from 1859 to 2012, National League East Champions. Our evening could not be in better hands than those of attorney Phil Hochberg, who professionally has represented just about every acronym in the sports world, from the NFL to the NBA to the National Hockey League, NASCAR, PGA, LPGA, Masters Tournament, football. It goes on. He is just a star attorney. But
tell it to my clients.
But his passion, or his avocation, as he says in his bio, he has for many years done public address announcing at sporting events. He spent 38 years with the Washington Redskins and is one of 39 persons and the first non-player coach owner to be honored by the team in its Hall of Fame Ring of Stars at FedEx Field. Previously, many of you may have heard him when he was the announcer for the Senators, the Washington Senators. And he's also done part-time work for the Baltimore Orioles for 3 seasons. But I think the wonderful moment that makes it so appropriate now is that in 2013, so this was recently, when was this? You were inducted into the DC Sports Hall of Fame in a ceremony at National Stadium. So, hey, round of applause. So the format is that our lads will be in conversation, and then they'll open it up to Q&A, and we'll want you to use the microphone because we're going to be taping this and putting it up on YouTube. And then Mr. Frommer has graciously agreed to sign books. So following the program, we'll have the book signing. So thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for that kind introduction. I'm flattered. I'm flattered by the introduction. I'm flattered by Fred asking me to appear with him. Fred, first of all, you got to have heart. Where did you get the title?
Well, I have to admit it wasn't my idea. My publisher came up with it, but it was a good idea. Some of you may be familiar with the play "Damn Yankees." It's about a Senators fan who's so disgusted with the Yankees winning the World Series every year that he sells his soul to the devil to become a center fielder and lead the team to a pennant. And there's a great song on there by the manager. It happens all the time in real games, actually. Managers break out into song, and he sings, "You Gotta Have Heart." And so that's the title.
The book, The Year the Yankees Lost the Pennant, was written by a fellow named Doug Wallop, who lived in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And I can remember going to see the movie Damn Yankees at the Avalon Theater on Connecticut Avenue. And there's one scene in the movie where Joe Hardy, who is he's the Bryce Harper of the book.
I've compared Bryce Harper to him, actually.
Is presented with an award, and a woman comes on the screen and she says, "Joe, the Ladies Club of Chevy Chase wants to honor you." And of course, the movie theater is located in Chevy Chase, D.C., right across the line from Chevy Chase, Maryland. And the audience broke out into applause at that nothing line in the movie. So, I mean, there is that connection with Doug Wallop's book, the movie, the play, and this year we had to have heart. Fred and I were talking beforehand. Let me get a sense of the audience, how the audience reacts. I've been following baseball in Washington since 1948. This year was a mild disappointment. Seriously. It was wonderful to have baseball back in Washington and to have a winning team. They made a run at the playoffs, but after I started following baseball in 1948, and we're going to go back even beyond that, the old Washington Senators had one winning season before they left for Minnesota. The expansion Washington Senators had one winning season before they left for Texas. We had a winning season last year, a great season last year, and we had a winning season this year. And it's just wonderful to have winning baseball back in Washington. We'd love to have a pennant to look at, but just having baseball back and having a winning team was satisfaction for me. Fred, it's been 80 years this year since a Washington baseball team was in the World Series.
That's right. In 1933, the Senators made their last appearance. They lost in 5 games to the New York Giants. And just to put it into perspective, what Phil's talking about, this is a disappointing season, I think, for most people. But you got to look back and what happened after the last time a Washington team made the postseason. Well, the very next year, they came in 7th place, not 2nd place like this year, 20 games under 500. Now, here's the kicker, though. The owner is in dire need of cash. So he sells off his star player manager, a guy named Joe Cronin, who had hit 118 RBIs in 1933. Sells him off to the Boston Red Sox in kind of like a mini, reverse of the curse, I guess. 15 years after Babe Ruth was sold to the Red Sox, to the Yankees rather. But making matters worse is that Cronin was the owner's son-in-law. So I don't know if there was a family problem there, but after that, I don't know what happened, but baseball was just terrible, as you alluded to. They had really only one legitimate pennant race after that, 1945, where they were a game and a half out of first place, and that was it. So, to get to Phil's point, we've had 2 contenders in a row here, whereas before there was no contender since 1945. I mean, it's true there was no baseball here for a big chunk of that, but even still, no one had even witnessed for generations and generations anything close to a pennant race. We've had 2 in a row, so in the grand scheme of things, things are looking up.
Let me ask a question of the audience. How many of you go back to Griffith Stadium? Wow. I would have thought, I look out here at the audience, I see a number of gray-haired individuals. I would have thought that there were a lot of baseball fans who went back to the 70s in Washington. Say again? Well, that... in any case, welcome to Washington baseball. 80 years since losing the World Series. Next year, 90 years since winning the World Series. What does the book talk about in terms of the 24 team?
Well, I'm sorry, say that again. The
24, the
1924 team. Sorry, it was a great moment in Washington baseball history. Obviously, the only time they won the World Series. And the city was so enthralled with the team that President Calvin Coolidge sort of half joked that, people weren't really doing their jobs for the government. They were all excited about the team. They would go to the games, and even during the World Series when the team was on the road in New York, they would watch the games be recreated on a mechanical scoreboard in downtown buildings. And not only in Washington, but the Senators were a bit of America's team back then. There was no baseball south or west of St. Louis at the time, and people were kind of sick of New York. I don't know if that sounds familiar or not. The last 3 World Series prior to 24 was New York Giants and New York Yankees every time. And Will Rogers actually wrote a column where he said, nobody outside of New York wants the Yankees or Giants to win. I mean, we're sick of them. We're sick of they win all the time. They got all the money. They got all the wealth. We love this team. And Walter Johnson, the Hall of Fame pitcher, was really a big part of that because at that point he was 36 years old. He'd always pitched for usually a loser, and if not a loser, an also ran. And people wanted to see him get a chance to make it to the World Series. And it almost looked like it was going to be a very unhappy ending because in the World Series he lost his first 2 games. And then he comes out in the 7th game of the World Series. They bring him out into the game from the bullpen, and he immediately gets on the ropes. It's 1st and 3rd with 1 out. And, he's about to lose the game. He wiggles out of 2 really serious jams, and they win the game in 12 innings. And so it's a storybook ending. He gets the win, and the place went completely crazy.
People were looking for Walter Johnson. I mean, he had become a national hero. Couldn't be found after he won that game. He actually had gone to dinner at the Occidental Restaurant And if you ever go into the Occidental with all of the autographed pictures, on the first wall as you walk in off to the right, one of the very first pictures you'll see is the autographed picture of Walter Johnson. And when the Occidental had been closed a few years ago, I tried to buy that one picture. They wouldn't sell it. All right, so they win in 24. They come back, they win again in 25.
Right. And then in 33, those are 3 pennants. And in 25, they lose the World Series. And actually, Walter Johnson loses the 7th game of the World Series, so it's kind of a downer. But it was a really exciting time, those 9 years or so. And the funny thing also is that Clark Griffith, the owner, really found a formula that he liked. I mentioned this player manager and Joe Cronin, who was 26 years old. It's true that there were player managers back then, but even in 1933, he was the youngest manager. Well, before that, in 1924, Bucky Harris, who was 27, was his player manager, and he led them to the pennant the next year as well. And so Griffith he had this, what he thought was this model that worked for him, that he liked these guys with spunk and vigor and everything. After he sells Cronin, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Bucky Harris took his place, right? Bucky Harris came back for 3 stints.
And Bucky was back here in the 50s as well.
Right.
He made at least 3 or 4 terms as a Washington manager.
And the guy between Bucky Harris and Joe Cronin was Walter Johnson. And he actually was a pretty good manager. They had good years. They had close to a .600 winning percentage in, I think, the 3 years he was here, but he never got them over the top, and the thought was he was too nice. He had there was a knock against him as a nice guy, and he wouldn't be tough enough on his players. I don't know if that is really true, but there is a great quote from Ty Cobb in his autobiography, and Ty Cobb said he would crowd the plate against Walter Johnson because he knew that Johnson was too nice to brush him back.
What happened after 33? I mean, he gets rid of Cronin. What happened to the club? Why did they go into the toilet?
Clark Griffith was a bit of an anachronism in baseball even then. He was a former pitcher. He'd been had a mean spitball, actually. And he didn't really have a lot of money. I mean, he had to mortgage his Montana ranch to buy the team. And by the 30s, there were other more wealthy owners, like in New York and in Boston. And it's true there was no free agency then. But if you were really rich as a team, you could just buy lots of minor league teams. And for example, I think in the 40s, the Yankees had 13 minor league teams. The Senators could only afford 1 minor league team. And that was your pipeline, And so he just really couldn't compete. And he wound up selling players like Cronin. And it was this death spiral. The less attractive the team was, obviously, less people came out. And he didn't have more. And then there was no money to put into the team. It became a death spiral. And sorry, go ahead.
The one thing that Griff did do, and he was in the forefront of this, was Cuban ball players.
Right.
He had a Baltimore. Joe Cambria was from Baltimore, and the Griff sent him down to Cuba, and a lot of the stars of the Senators were Cuban ball players at that time. Do you treat the Cuban immigration in the book?
I do. In fact, in 33, when the Senators lost the World Series, the guy that closed out against them was a Cuban ball player. And Griffith kind of took notice of this and said, I want to get on this bandwagon. And he was an innovator. That was one thing that was an equalizer for him. Ironically, after baseball integrated in 47, the Senators were one of the last holdouts. And when they did finally integrate well into the 50s, it was a Cuban black player that they signed. But I remember Calvin Griffith, who was Clark Griffith's nephew and adopted son. He would talk about how people would challenge some of these Cuban players back in the 30s and say, I don't know, this guy looks like he's dark skinned to me, and Clark Griffith was always get him, get him to pass. But that was a big controversy at the time.
What about the Negro Leagues? Now, the Homestead Grays played at Griffith Stadium. Why do you think Griff did not seek to bring in any of the Negro League players?
Well, he had a meeting with Buck Leonard and Josh Gibson, who were known as the Black Babe Ruth and Black Lou Gehrig of their time, great players, and he was getting some pressure, mostly from black sports writers, to integrate. This is in the 40s. And he said, what do you think about that? And they said, we'll leave it to others to decide. And he said, well, I got to tell you, if this happens, it's going to be the death of Negro leagues. And I don't know if they really cared so much about that. What he did care about was the rent he was getting from the Homestead Grays. They were paying a lot of money, and his team wasn't making a lot of money. So it is a shame that he missed out on a chance to be a real hero, pre-Jackie Robinson. In the 40s, Washington, as many of you might know, was a small sort of southern city, and it would have taken a lot of guts to do that, and he didn't have it, unfortunately.
Yeah. You remember John Kennedy's great line about Washington was a city with northern charm and southern efficiency. And Griffin, it was a hand-to-mouth existence running this club. And I think what Fred is alluding to was that the Homestead Grays, who played both in Homestead outside of Pittsburgh and here in Washington, were an integral part of of Griffith's finances. He needed that team. He needed the Homestead Grays playing in Griffith Stadium so that he could get the rent.
Yeah.
Of course, he also had another tenant, the Washington Redskins, who, as many of you probably know, George Preston Marshall, likewise, refused to integrate the team until 1962.
Yeah, and from my research, Griffin wasn't a racist in the way Prescott was, but he just didn't. He was kind of conservative, the small C. He didn't really want to rock the boat. But I wanted to ask you a question. Since we talked about Griffith Stadium, and since you went there a bunch of times, can you describe what it was like? How you got to the ballpark, and what was nearby, and what was the feel of the place?
Some of you go back to Griffith Stadium. You remember taking the streetcar down 7th Street, past the Wonder Bread factory, and you got off the streetcar right in front of the ballpark. And as you got off the streetcar, you could get the smell of the bakery. It was of course, I was a kid at that time. It was a wonderful experience going to the ballpark. The park itself was built as many of the ballparks were in the first half of the 20th century, where they could get land. There was no idea, as you find in today, where eminent domain might be used to take someone's home in order to build a ballpark, to build a cultural facility, what have you. No, the Griffith built the stadium. It had unusual, what do I want to say, dimensions. If you were to look at a picture of the stadium, you'd see that there was in deep center field, there was a cutout, with no particular reason, except that apparently the guy who lived in the house right behind the stadium had refused to sell it to Griffith, and so they had to change the dimensions of the ballpark. In right field, there was a huge wall about 37 feet high. It probably had been cleared a number of times, but certainly not by Washington Senator players. In left field, the stands were 407 feet down the line, Washington, the ball players, the Washington players. I remember Eddie Stewart playing here in the late 40s. He was the leading home run hitter. He got all of his home runs on the road and led the team with 8 home runs for the entire season. The 407 feet was a long ways. And so what they did in the early 50s was to create what they called the beer garden. And so in front of the bleachers, they created 3 or 4 new rows of stands, brought the fence in, and that's where they sold beer in the ballpark. I don't know if they sold beer otherwise, but it was called the beer garden. And as they brought the fences in, they started to get some real power hitters. Some of you may remember the Senators of the late '50s. They had Harmon Killebrew, Roy Sievers, who had led the league in home runs, Jim Lemon, and Bob Allison. They had 4 real sluggers on that team, and then of course Calvin moved them to Minnesota, and they won the pennant.
Of course.
4 years after they left here. The ballpark was located on the site right now of where Howard University's hospital is located. And there are some plaques and a couple of, I don't want to call them mementos. What's the word I'm searching for? There were...
Keepsakes.
Huh?
Keepsake?
No. There are a number of references to the ballpark being there if you go up to the Howard University hospital. And the city of Washington did a program a year ago. Clark Griffith, Calvin's son, the old man's great nephew, came in and he talked about the '24 World Series where when Johnson won the 7th game and Earl McNeely hit a ground ball that Freddie Lindstrom of the Giants went to pick up. The ball hit a pebble in front of Lindstrom's, bounced over Lindstrom's head, and Muddy Rule scored from second to give the Senators their world championship. The ballpark was a nothing ballpark. The smallest capacity in the majors, about 27,000. But in any case, it was never filled except for opening day. They used to sell out opening day, and that reminds me. Let's talk about the presidents and their association with the Washington Ball Club.
It goes back 100 years to 1910. President Taft, and that's one reason that they made him into I suspect they made him into a running president. But it was a really, really fun tradition. It was very different than what you see today. In a way, you wouldn't see the president on the pitcher's mound throwing to a catcher or the manager. Back then, the president would just be in his seats, in the front row, and he'd throw the ball over a scrum of photographers, and then players from both sides would battle for it, and whoever could get it would bring it over and have the president sign it. And in 1961, a White Sox outfielder named Jim Rivera brought the ball over to President Kennedy, and Kennedy apparently scribbled his autograph pretty quickly, and Rivera took exception, and he said, "Do you think you could take this ball into any bar on the south side of Chicago and people are going to believe the president signed this? Now sign this ball more legibly." Kennedy had the same reaction you did, and he was a good sport about it, and he signed it again.
What about other presidents and baseball? We've got. I've yet to read Scott Berg's new biography of Woodrow Wilson, but Wilson used to come out in an armored car. This was after he suffered his stroke, and they would drive the car and leave it on the right field foul line, in foul territory, obviously,
right,
where Wilson would watch the game.
Griffith was worried about how to accommodate Wilson because he was concerned about his health, and he didn't think it would be a good idea to have him in middle seat. So, as you said, they put him in an armored car, and they had I'm not sure if it was players or policemen in front of the car to guard it from foul balls, and that was a pretty cool place to watch the game.
Who among all the presidents was the biggest baseball fan?
Oh, it was Richard Nixon, hands down. In fact, going back to when he was vice president in 1959. He was in the Soviet Union for the famous kitchen debate. And Roy Sievers, a Senators player, told me the story that Nixon actually called and said, "What's going on with you guys? I see you're not doing very well, and I want you to meet me at the airport when I get back from the Soviet Union, and I want you to bring player A, B, and C." So they all show up, and Nixon kind of says, "What's going on with you guys? What's happening?" And Sievers says, "Hitting's not good, our pitching's not good." Nixon says, "All right, I'll tell you what, I'll be out there tomorrow night. Well, it sounds kind of like a non sequitur, but Nixon apparently was a good luck charm, and he usually when he was there, yeah, in this context, if not nothing else, when he was out there, they would win, but they lost, and their losing streak hit 17, 18 games before it was finally snapped.
What about the other presidents? You have any stories about them?
Well, the JFK one. Actually, there's one more Nixon story, if you don't mind. If I can, this is back when he was president. This is when he became president. After the senators had moved, or they had been announced they were going to move to Texas, the second senators team, and there was no team to take his place. And Nixon, on the Oval Office tapes, actually has a meeting with the mayor of Washington, and he says, let's think about some teams we can get as a replacement. And he says, maybe Cleveland, the Indians weren't drawing very well, maybe the White Sox. And he predicted that within 5 years, by the time of the bicentennial in 1976, that Washington would have a team. But obviously he was off by a few years.
And Franklin Roosevelt, would he come out?
Oh, yeah, many times. He was a big fan, and, obviously he, as a person who was president longer than anyone else in history, he had his share, and he went out to more games than any other president. And there were some great pictures of him, actually, back then, smoking a cigar and just taking in the action. His successor, Truman, tried to pull it off an ambidextrous thing. He was a lefty, and he tried to throw a ball right-handed, and the Washington Post called it like a sad little throw or something. Apparently didn't quite pass muster.
And Ike, I know that there was one year when Eisenhower passed up opening day to go down to Augusta to play golf, and the local residents were up in arms. Well, to the extent that it mattered, there were a lot of people who were upset about it. Do you identify that in the book?
Yeah, in fact, if memory serves, the game was rained out, and he kind of got like a second chance, and so he came back, and he knew it was a bad idea. He wasn't obviously into baseball very much. I talked to Charlie Brotman, who was a longtime PA announcer, and he said that of all the presidents that he'd met, that Ike was the least into baseball. But there was one game where the Senators won on a walk-off hit, and Ike actually rushed onto the field to try to congratulate the player, and his Secret Service guys had to intercept him. And they said, "Don't worry, we'll bring the player to you. You don't come to the player."
You might be referring to the opening day, I'm going to guess at the year 54 or so. Mickey Vernon hits a home run.
Vernon, that's right.
To win the game, opening day. And the President Eisenhower, asks to have Vernon brought into the presidential box so that Eisenhower, could congratulate Vernon. Now, what about official Washington these days? Do we know of any any of the bigwigs that attend the games with regularity, or well-known press people here?
Yeah, I mean, it's become a bit of a team of the national media elite, if you will, political media elite. And so you have, people like Charles Krauthammer are big fans, the season ticket holder, Juan Williams, Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid. This is the one thing that they can agree on, is that the Nationals are the team to root for. And McConnell actually told me that after the Nationals lost that brutal game to the Cardinals in Game 5 last year, he said it was like a death on the family. So it's it was sad, but there are a lot of politicians, pundits. Ben Bernanke actually wrote a column last year where he said, if Washington is looking for examples of leadership, look no further than the Nationals dugout, and specifically Davy Johnson.
That was last
that was then.
year. Davy's come in for a little criticism this year.
Yeah.
Were the ball players, in your talking to them, were they cooperative with you? Did they enjoy talking about the old days?
Oh, they loved it. Yeah. The old-time players generally are better at interviews than current players, and the current players were nice enough and polite, but they're kind of in the middle of it. They're not looking back with nostalgia, and so some of the old players were great. And the Roy Seaver story was really good. I have a funny story from Eddie Brinkman. It was the shortstop. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But he was this classic good field no-hit shortstop. And in 67 and 68, back-to-back, and I might get these reversed, but it doesn't really matter. It's 187 and 188. That's how consistently bad he was. So Ted Williams becomes manager, as Phil alluded to, and what better hitting coach could you possibly have? And Ted Williams tells him, you know, during spring training, I don't want to see you with a mitt during the next few weeks. You know, if I see you with a mitt, I'm going to hit you over the head with a baseball bat. I just want you to work on your hitting the entire time. And sure enough, like the day before the first spring training game, Brinkman goes to Williams. He says, well, I haven't taken any fielding yet. He goes, oh, you better get out there. So, and Brinkman hits 266 that year. There's a really great story, though, about Frank Howard, the other extreme. Frank Howard was, as some of you probably know, was a great slugger here. You know, hit 40-something home runs, but also struck out a lot. And some of you might remember the old white painted seats in the upper deck in RFK Stadium, and that's where he hit home runs. In fact, I talked to Tim Kirkshin about it. He said that he talked to current players and pointed out those seats, and nobody believed, especially pre-steroids, that anybody could hit the ball that far. But getting back to Ted Williams, one of his friends was on the field before the game once, and he would marvel at those white seats. He goes, wow, did Frank Howard really hit the ball that far all those times? And Williams says, yeah, but you see the 13,000 other seats over there? Yeah, those are all the times he struck out on me.
Why don't we open it up to questions? We've got, I don't know, how much time?
How much time I got? Great.
15, 20 minutes. Let's open it up to questions. Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
How do you do this? Oh, she's going.
Hey, enjoyed your talk very much, Fred.
Thank you, Claude.
Sure. Question: is it true or is it apocryphal that the seventh inning stretch started in DC? There's some talk that Taft started that when he was president. Is that true or is that urban?
Yeah, I've heard that story. I can't nail it down one way or the other that was apocryphal or not. Phil, do you have a sense of that?
I wasn't there. Yes, sir, in the back.
I'm curious about the fan experience at Griffith. Two things. First, Bill Veeck brought a lot of kind of the circus to baseball. And I'm wondering, was there anything like that at Griffith, or was Griffith all just, very tight-knit the whole time? And the second question is maybe more serious. Segregation, and how did Griffith Stadium kind of handle segregation, both for the Senators games and for the Grays games? I mean, were they fully segregated? Were African Americans relegated in both times to lesser seats, or just how did that work?
I really can't answer that. I would refer you to Brad Snyder's book, which deals with the baseball in Washington, Negro League baseball. I have no recollection of segregated seating. I'm sorry, I just can't. I can't answer that.
If I could jump in, my understanding is there was segregated games when at least the blacks sat in their own section at Senators games. I don't know there was much of an issue for Grays games. I don't know that there were many white fans that went, but I do know a lot of black fans went to Senators games. They were actually big supporters. They were huge fans. So it made it even sadder how the local situation was. And what was your other question? I'm sorry.
About promotion.
Oh yeah,
promotion. The old Senators were, even the expansion Senators were a dead-ass organization. There was no such thing as promotion. Certainly the original Senators. In those days, Veeck was totally unique in terms of the things that he did. And Washington had absolutely nothing. There were some mild attempts with the expansion Senators at DC Stadium, later became RFK Stadium. But when Short bought the club, he had a fellow named Oscar Malamat doing his promotions. And the extent of their promotions was pantyhose night. That, if you didn't have to wear pantyhose to get into the ballpark. But if a lady came to the game, she'd get a pair of pantyhose.
That actually reminds me of a story about the 1933 team. There was a Ladies' Day game where the woman could get in for maybe a quarter. And so when the Senators clinched the pennant 80 years ago, actually this past Saturday, Joe Cronin he was a handsome, young, successful guy. He had to escape the mobs of women. It was kind of like a early Beatlemania thing. And the Washington Post describes this. He's in the clubhouse, and the people are waiting for him. Some men too, but mostly women. And he decides to just go onto the field and try to escape that way. Then there's another crowd of women over there, and he rushes out to the center field wall, and there's a door, and he runs out and gets into his car. So, excitement in baseball in Washington.
We've got another question over here, and then we'll come over to you.
I went to the last Senators game, and please help my poor memory, but I remember that, as I recall, the franchise ended rather ignominiously. They were leading, but the game never finished. And then secondly, the highlight of the game was when somebody poured beer on Bob Short's head.
Your memory does not serve you well. The last game, the fans ran out on the field with 2 outs, and they couldn't finish the game, and the game was then forfeit. The Short incident occurred the following year at Baltimore. The baseball Bill Holdsworth, the bartender from up here.
Holdsworth.
Holdsworth?
Holdsworth.
The Hawk and Dove?
Hawk and Dove, right. Yeah. Just down the street here.
There's a great picture of Short sitting in Memorial Stadium, and Baseball Bill has just poured a cup of beer over Short's head, and he's smiling. He's got the big smile. Needless to say, Bob Short looked a little abashed as he was sitting there with beer dripping down him.
I need to make one small change to the story. So, Baseball Bill told me that he held an effigy sign. They made up a little fake Bob Short, and they held it over him, and then a sign that made fun of him and made front pages of a lot of papers. And then he, according to baseball lore, is the guy that poured beer on Bob Short. But Baseball Bill told me that it was another woman, because he said, I wouldn't waste a beer on that guy.
Short was reviled here, and in fact, when Bob Short ran for the United States Senate in 1978. Pick it up.
Okay.
Pick up the story, Fred.
So Short had already sold the Rangers a few years earlier, and he had been in politics before. He had been the treasurer for the Democrats in '68. So he runs as Democrat in Minnesota, his home state. And this guy, Baseball Bill, we talked about, he's got a long memory, and he forms Baseball Bill's committee to keep Bob Short out of Washington, D.C. They have a little fundraiser in his backyard. They raise enough money to take a half-page ad out in a Minneapolis newspaper. And they say 71 years of baseball tradition meant nothing to this guy. Minnesotans have a proud tradition of sending people like Humphrey and Mondale and McCarthy to the United States Senate. Does Bob Short measure up? We think not. And then you remember Calvin Griffith, right? He's the guy that moved the first team, and they wrote at the end, P.S. You can keep Calvin Griffith too.
Of course, my memories are vivid of the expansion team. Calvin had told the city of Washington that the Senators would not move in his lifetime, and Mo Siegel wrote a story saying, "I guess Calvin has just died." When he moved the team.
And then the line was something like "Washington now, Washington forever," and he later blamed it on an overeager PR person who'd written the piece for him.
I'll share one very personal memory. When the expansion team moved to Texas, I remember laying in bed that night, hearing the story, and it was as if somebody had died in my family. A feeling, a personal feeling of total helplessness. There was something that meant so much to me had been taken away, and there was nothing that I could do. And how many years ago? 1970, 42 years ago. I still remember the outraged feelings. Well, okay, we got a question over here.
Is there any tension between the Twins and the Nationals, since the Nationals claim the 24 World Series when it's actually the Twins, the franchise, that has that? I mean, because the Nationals have this kind of strange like mixing of the
Right.
the Rangers.
They've kind of like
and the Grays,
and they've sort of disowned the Expos. Which
right.
is
It's
who
a
they
very
were.
strange sort of. I was wondering, is there any legal issue or anything like that where the Twins are saying actually that's our World Series, you shouldn't be flying this.
I think the Twins are happy to kind of keep Washington baseball at arm's length. I mean, the 2014 was a great one, but for the most part, Washington was a sad story in the 20th century, and the Twins have been more successful. So I don't get the sense that they have any ownership. Maybe you have a sense.
I do remember that Bert Hawkins, who used to cover the Senators for the Washington Star, wrote a front page article in the Sporting News about who owns the records when the team moved to Minneapolis. I tell you what offends me. Our club here has been here since '05. I don't care about the Montreal Expos. I don't care what their records are. When somebody has a particularly good performance and they talk about the franchise history, it doesn't mean anything to me that he did it in Montreal. I'm interested just in baseball in Washington. I don't know how many other people might share that opinion, but
I have a friend actually who was a fan of the Expos in Washington. Now he lives here, and he thinks that they should do more to honor the old tradition. So,
You're an Expo fan back there?
No, I say if you look at the online community, there are Expos fans who still follow the team.
Oh.
They feel very much the same way.
Well, that life will go on.
Bill, you grew up here in D.C. Where'd you go to high school, and what was it like during the season? Did the guys skip school to go to games and the like?
No. I was fortunate. They didn't play many day games in the first place. I went to Wilson High School. I was very fortunate as a teenager. I was a gopher for Bob Wolf, who was doing the Senators play-by-play, and you can imagine what this was like for a kid. I did it for 2 years, and then I was replaced by another fellow named Maury Povich, and I'm kind of I've lost. I don't know whatever happened to Povich after, but Bob Wolf, an announcer here, an announcer with NBC in New York. Just a wonderful guy. He was recently honored by the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress acquired 70 years worth of radio and television interviews that Bob had recorded. And the Library of Congress did a big event on April 26th honoring Bob. And if you go to the Library of Congress website, you can hear some of the interviews that Bob did from actually the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. That baseball. To get back to your question, baseball. They would draw 1/5 the number of fans that they draw now. I remember with the expansion Senators, if we would hit 10,000 people at it, that was a good night. Now, the lowest drawing ball club averages 16, 18,000 a game. So the whole nature of baseball has changed. The stories are told. Bud Selig, when he took over as commissioner in 1995, he was acting commissioner before that. Baseball's revenues were something like $1.5 billion. Now they're above $8 billion. It's exploded. But back in the 40s and 50s, no, there wasn't that much interest, except by teenage boys.
Just to follow up on the earlier question, the Snyder book puts the segregated section in Griffith Stadium in the right field stands. And I guess that was where Babe Ruth had been knocked unconscious in 1924 when he was going for a foul ball. And
there's a famous picture, actually, yeah, of
Right,
him
of
like
him-
laying
of him
flat
like
out, and a bunch of black fans are looking down. So, yeah.
so it's the right field stands.
All right. question here from the distaff side.
Can you talk just a little bit about baseball in 1859 in Washington, D.C.?
I just made that up for the
Oh,
title.
okay.
There actually were two different teams, clubs back then. One was the Potomacs and one was the Washington Baseball Club, not Washington National Baseball Club. And baseball was spelled with two words back then. They were known as the Nationals for short. And they played a bunch of tournaments. They had a kind of friendly rivalry. But the Potomacs eventually faded from view, and the Nationals became the team that survived for a while. There was actually a tournament on the Ellipse in 1860s. This is when President Johnson, Andrew Johnson, was in office, and he let government workers out early for the day to watch the action. Unfortunately, the Nationals lost the games 35-12 and 87, I think, to 12. They actually gave up 87 runs in one of those games. So pitching was much worse than it is now, even if you can ever complain about today's pitching. There's all the pitching. Yeah.
All right, any further questions? Back here.
Any speculation about who the new general manager is going to be?
Well, Mike Rizzo will have
I think
problems if
I think you mean manager, right? Do you mean manager?
the manager, not the general manager. What do we know? What do we read in the paper? That,
Just history, yeah.
You know, they say that that Randy Knorr, who's been the bench coach, or Trent Jewett, who is the third base coach, or they may bring in somebody from the outside, but they don't share that with us. Maybe they share it with Fred.
No intel.
One final question.
What do you guys think the Nats should do in the off season?
What do the Nats do in the offseason?
Nats do in the off season to make it so we're even better next year.
Oh.
Come on, give us some.
Well, I have my opinion. They got to hope that Detweiler comes back, okay? And get rid of Herron. Boy, was he? What a disappointment. You know, can they move Rendon to third base? He's not a power hitter. I mean, you know, that third base right now, he had 26 home runs from Zimmerman. The bench, except for Lombardozzi, was very weak this year. I guess all of these, you know, they have got to make sure that they have left-handed relief pitchers. In that sense, it was a disappointing season, but it was a wonderful season. Let me before we move. Let me. How many people here agree with my perception that it really was great to have baseball, even though they didn't pull it off at the end? It's a wonderful game. It's a wonderful game.
Band-Aid in the ballpark's better than a good day at the office.
Indeed.
Can we take one more question from here? Okay.
The question, I think, for Phil. What was it like watching a baseball game then, the Senators, and versus now? You know, the way of watching a game, seeing it, the action, the pacing, you name it.
You're talking to somebody who finds the game day experience, which is what they talk about, to be disconcerting. The walk-up music, the Wilson Ramos. Let me tell you a funny story. 1962. I'm 21 years old. I'm doing the PA announcing for the Washington Senators. The Yankees come into town for the first time, and I introduce as they're coming to bat, batting third, the right fielder, number 9, Roger Maris. And Bob Addy, who used to the dean of Washington baseball writers, gets up, walks over to me. I'm sitting in the second row of the press box. He's in the Roger Maris, you introduce him the way you introduce everybody else. Here I am. I'm a 21-year-old kid, and I'm getting chewed out by the dean of the Washington baseball writers. It made an impression on me. And apart from a fellow named Paul Casanova, who played here in the 60s, I never tried to make myself the attraction that the PA announcers are these days. But the game has changed. With all due respect, they're not appealing to us. They're appealing to our kids and our grandkids. And our kids and our grandkids enjoy that. That's why I personally prefer to watch the game on television at home, because I'm not subject to what makes me uncomfortable. That's just my own personal opinion. Thank you for asking.
And you see, like, the old film clips and pictures from the old teams. You know, often men would be wearing suits and ties, top hats. You know, after the Senators won the World Series, you saw these top hats going up in the air. It was a more formal society, and that translated to baseball. So it was just a different atmosphere, and you know, they didn't have the loud music, like you say. Well, I guess I would. You know, one thing I wanted to point out when you talk about the attendance figures, how baseball's exploded. You know, Washington only drew 1 million fans once before the team came here in 2005. That was I believe it was in '46. After the World War II, people were excited. Ted Williams' excitement of bringing a winning team to Washington. Even then, it was a big deal, but they had 900,000 people. And in 1933, for example, when they won their last pennant, they averaged less than 6,000 people a game. That was in the middle of the Depression, but it wasn't low for baseball. It was one of the best attendance marks in baseball. So it was very, very different. You know, it's just a much more popular sport now, which is a good thing. But you know, it's very different. And I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
I agree completely.
Okay.
I agree completely. I guess the one final word that I would have is, buy his book.
Thank you.
Get him to sign it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
all
Appreciate
for
it.
coming.